I think when we're looking at being visible within the Native community, it really has to do with what type of artist is speaking. Very traditional artists, if they're addressing traditional methods and forms, that's only for a specific audience and time. So those, in a sense, are looking to be invisible or not seen by the larger audiences. When you're speaking to contemporary artists or artists who are making a point or calling to action different issues, then there's a sense of urgency of wanting to be seen. And so there's a push towards wanting that visibility. So I think, it really depends on when we're looking at ourselves as Indigenous people, what the direction is and how visible we want to be. Because in many situations, if it's a traditional issue or theme or dealing with that, we don't want to invite the public in. And so a lot of times this question of being visible and invisible, it depends on the situation that we're in and the ideas that we're dealing with. As a contemporary Native artist, I'm trying to get my voice out there, and I'm using a lot of different ways in which to get the message out. I think earlier in my career, I made a lot of work. It was pretty confrontational, and I think a lot of times in certain situations, the people that I was reaching would sort of shut down and be like, angry Native, don't want to hear this. So I realized that through sort of the, using honey or the sweet work that I make, that it was able to open the door and invite the viewers in, and in a weird way setting a little trap of like, this is really sweet and non-threatening, and she's so cute, and then they come in, and then I start unpacking the stories of the pieces and how it is speaking about how our communities have been colonized, how our communities are trying to break out of this mold. And I'm using, in a sense, the trickster mode of maybe coyote or rabbit and some of those things to unpack these stories. And so what seems to some people as like candy sweet, when I start to unpack the stories, they're like, holy cow. And then I realized when I did that, those people who didn't want to hear about all this, they became the strongest fighters for what the work was about, because they were educated, and they were educated in a way that wasn't like, you're bad, they. It was like all of us. And in the setting of how I grew up, like with my grandmother, she treated us like little children and would educate us and respect us. And then we came to a place of understanding. So when I'm making my work or doing my work, I'm trying to come at it from that angle of a non-threatening place, and then slowly educating people to how I'm seeing the world and where I'm coming from. And so a lot of times, I'll have people who say, well, you're not making confrontation, you could be more out there. But I've learned, in my little stealth manner, that I can make a point in this other way. It's slower work, and a lot of people don't understand it, but for me, over time it has made a huge impact, and I'm able to infiltrate into places that I wasn't able to with some of my other work that was more confrontational. I think when we're looking at mainstream society and how we're not visible and they haven't invited us to the table for discussion, is just coming down to politics and numbers and economic issues. I've over the 25, 30 years that I've been making work, I think, gosh, if you're making money, if you're like very successful in the world, those are the people that's voices get heard. And we are still in that, we're still a small percentage of the population. And because of that, I think at times we don't get the votes, or we don't have the money, and there's this repetition of this sad story of where we're coming from. And I think a lot of natives in this contemporary world are trying to elevate where we're at and how we see ourselves and how we portray ourselves to the community, so that we're trying to look at the positive things that we're doing to strengthen our voices. I think it's, when casinos came in, there was a lot of pushback of like, do we really want this? Do we not? And different people who supported that were like, well, it'll raise us to a level where we have money to either buy back tribal lands, to start our own education systems, our medical situations. And so in a weird way, I don't really support casinos in the bigger scheme, but the money that it brings in and the way that it has slowly helped some Native nations change and negotiate a seat at the table for themselves, that's powerful. You have different artists also who have gotten to a certain point economically, that then they are given a seat at the table. And so it's an unfair way to look at the situation, but realistically, it really comes down to all that. And all we have to do is look at the situation in our country when it comes time to elections, and how presidents, of color have gotten in there. We're at the grassroots of really slowly making those changes and helping a certain community out. But I think it also goes back to education, and education, in a lot of our communities isn't as strong as it could be. And so I think it's a lot about economics and how we fit into that, about who gets invited to speak and whose voices are heard. And so again, the work I do is slow, and day by day, week, month, yearly, I'm thinking, how can I slowly make an impact? And maybe the work that I'm doing now isn't going to be seen, maybe until I pass. And strangely, when you look at the history of artists, a lot of artists, what they've done in their lifetime isn't seen until after they move on. And so in a strange way, looking back at Indigenous communities, we go back to that phrase of 7 generations, and looking like the work we do now isn't for us, it's for those coming behind. And it's really true. It's not just true for Native people, but for all peoples. As an artist growing up, I remember there was a point where I made that realization and thought, it's not about me, it's about what's coming next. And so, some people will become famous right away, but some may not become known. And so then you have to think, what work can I do to make things better for my community? And I've chosen a slow, even path, and it may not be as recognizable, but I can live with myself. I can sleep at night, and I know that it's just a slower path to get to the table. And every now and then we get to the table, and then I try to be at the table talking about these issues and explaining to people where I'm coming from in a way almost like an elder or somebody educating a young person about who we are as Indigenous peoples, and how we can be included, and to break down that wall of stereotypes of how we've been seen for a long time. Oh my gosh, Thelma and Me is a portrait of myself and my grandmother, Thelma Baldwin. Thelma Baldwin is my mother's mother, and she's a traditional Navajo weaver, and her husband, Tom Baldwin, were just huge role models for me, and taught me about how to live, to wake up early in the morning, to be productive, to think about community. And I made the piece to really honor her and our relationship, and how she saw me, and saw me as this strong young Navajo woman, and always wanted to hear what I had to say, and loved me. She showed me love and attention that I think all young people crave for. And it gave me the belief that I was worthy and worthwhile and beautiful because of how she looked at me. And I think that that photo in that print has that image of us looking at each other with this, I don't know, I feel like it's a moment of like we're laughing and looking at each other, and it fills me with hope. And so that print is about hope. It's about two different generations of two strong Native American women. And it's like old knowledge that she has, and then a new younger generation coming up. Like there's so many levels of information in that print. And when I'm able to unpack it for different people, and when they ask about different things in that print, all of this comes out and they're just like, oh my gosh, it's really quite wonderful. And I'm like, yes, you know, it's not just a picture of me and my wonderful grandmother. It's like all of these different things. And depending on the audience or group or person, there's an unpacking of different aspects of that image in different situations. And I think all artists, we have all these different angles that we create an art piece, and it speaks to different levels. And I think it's true with so much. Like there's different levels of knowledge. And like if I'm explaining the piece to a younger audience, it's about, you know, the relationship with your grandmother. At a different level, it's this other thing. Then when we get into the contemporary art world and artists who understand this other stuff, then I'm unpacking all of that. So it's working on so many different levels. And but most importantly, it's honoring that relationship. I think the larger body of work, I have many different aspects of the work that is breaking through being invisible, in the sense of I'm using bright colors, I'm using non-threatening images, almost playful imagery that is looking back to stories of childhood. And then again, when I start unpacking some of the stories, it unpacks the stories and increases with education of history of my experiences with what audience I'm speaking to. And it's about breaking stereotypes. So a lot of times when people see my work, different people say, oh my gosh, you know, I didn't even know it was Native American. And why is it this way or that way? And then the questions come, and I answer those questions, or it puts a question mark in the viewer's mind when they see some of the work I make, because it's not a native brave on horseback. It's not, you know, an eagle image, or, you know, the images that we associate or want to see as a Native American art piece. Many of my works don't carry that, and it's intentional because I want the questions, I want the challenge. When somebody says your work isn't Native, and I'm like, yeah, and they're like, well, why not? And then we get into this discussion, and then I get to be in the place of educator and help them understand where I'm coming from. And in that way it becomes more visible. And people, you know, people like the honey, they like the sweetness, but then when they hear the stories and layers underneath all of that, they then are educating other people when they tell people about the work, and it becomes more visible. So it is almost like hidden or invisible in a way. And then when people educate each other or ask the questions, it becomes more and more visible. And it's a slower process, but for me, that's what the reward is when I started making the work in that way, I thought, you know what, my reward isn't going to be that I'm this, you know, certain thing. I'm going to be this slower turtle that is moving along slowly. And that's okay. And I'm okay with that. The day of minority, indigenous people being non-invisible, um, there's a beauty in the way that that sounds of us not being invisible. But I think with certain parts of our knowledge, we don't want that out there. So much of our knowledge and so much of what's valuable to us has been taken away or appropriated in very difficult ways that many of our communities are working to keep that invisible, to keep that for us or for certain times. So that part about being visible is a little scary to me at times. And there's different thought processes with that. There are different parts of our community that some want it open to everybody, others want it closed. So this question of being visible and invisible, it seems like something easy because you would say, yes, we want to be more visible, but it's complicated in the sense of the knowledge and the belief systems that we have. It's a question of who has access to that and who deserves to have that. And that argument is always going to be there within our community. As far as being visible and seen to make changes within our communities, as far as education, health, just the way in which we can have water and electricity, things like that, you know, that would be beautiful to have, and to have our voices heard and to be respected. That can't happen soon enough. Like, we all want that, and it's not just for the Native American community, but it's for African American people, it's for Latino, Asians, the LGBTQ community, like all of these communities that are not recognized and not heard and understood. We want to be visible and we want people to hear us, but within each of our communities, I think there's pockets of things that we want private and don't want that exposed. So I always say to people, when this question of visibility and how far we open the doors, I said, it's a slippery slope of what we want out there and how we invite people who are asking questions in, and how people will come in and maybe misunderstand things and take things out. And I think you'll only have to look at the fashion industry of how so many of our indigenous images have shown up on the runway and been used in like very difficult, awkward situations. Different things have been like taken out of our communities and show up in Sotheby's in France, and they shouldn't be there. So in those situations, we're very visible and people want those things. And then in our communities, we're thinking, oh my gosh, we don't want that out there. We do not want this type of visibility. So again, it really depends on what type of visibility and the respect that comes with that, I don't know, that way of putting us out in the world. I always say to people, the visibility and the questions about how we're seen, if it comes with respect and good intentions and understanding, then that's something I'm for. But if it's to, sell a fashion brand and make a bunch of money appropriating images that people don't understand, no, I don't want that type of visibility. So again, it's a complicated question. It's something wonderful to think about, and exhibitions like this that bring our voices forward and help people understand where we're coming from, I'm all for it. And the conversations and the questions, I invite them and I want them so that we can talk about it. I don't want people to be afraid of me. I want us to be able to talk about these things so people can become more understanding of why we are the way we are, and why we have the issues in our community that we have. I think a lot of times people have a solution to something and they want to like impose it on our communities. And I say, well, you need to really understand where we're coming from, because there might be reasons why we don't want certain things so quickly. These types of exhibitions that speak about making us more visible and giving honor to our voices are really powerful, and programming in which you're able to hear directly from people from our communities is amazing. I think in the past, there are art historians who've looked at our communities and have written their theories about who we are and what we are. And it's funny, when I remember when I was in school, I always would think, my gosh, some of us are still alive, like we're here, and you have this theory about who we are and what we are. Don't you know that in many of these communities, when anthropologists and people came in, that our people were onto what was happening and fed false information? And so a lot of your theories are based on like something that's false. And so you're seeing us in a way that's false. And so I say to people, the best way is to organize exhibitions like this, get our voices out there so that we can talk, and then also realize that those of us who are speaking from our history, our experience. I don't represent like all Indigenous people, and we are each individuals and have different experiences and belief systems. I mean, I may say one thing and you'll meet somebody from my community who might be traditional and Catholic. You might meet somebody who is Navajo and Mormon. You might meet somebody who is Navajo and another tribe. And there's a mixing of those belief systems of how people were brought up to give them the point of view that they have. It's always interesting to me when people say all Native people support the earth and see things this way. And I say to them, you know what? There are different Native people who are very conservative and support, a Republican way of seeing things. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have independents, and our communities aren't just one way or another. And so I think exhibitions like this invite different voices, and those of us who've been working in our with our work over a long time period can unpack and share that there are all these points of view. And it's why when people say, I want to help Native people, what can I do? And I say to them, you can come to know us. And when you come to know us, it's going to take years. It's not just coming in a summer and saying, we're going to bring this to your community and make you guys better. And I'm like, you know what? In any community, you need to invest the time, the respect, and it takes time to make change and time to educate people. And there's a lot of different ways that people see the world. And so you have to make that commitment to a community to do the slow, long work. And exhibitions like this and artists like us who come together to share our opinions, hopefully are opening that window door to the world, saying there's many ways in which we interact with the world and see the world. And when people begin to understand that, the stereotypes of how people see us and how we see ourselves become more visible.